Good evening and welcome to Washington County Kid Parent Speaker Series number 5, How to Support Your Child's Pathway Journey Through Gender Identity. My name is Larry Crepeau, Executive Director, and I'm very pleased that you've joined us for tonight's session. Our big mission is to promote and increase quality and out-of-school programs for all youth in Washington County. And we believe that these programs can help youth achieve their full potential, and we support this in many ways. One way is to contribute helping parents and providers through these types of events and with information on topics relevant to families. Also joining us tonight is Katie Riley, President of Washington County Kids, and Jessica Sim, Program Coordinator. And they've put all the pieces together tonight to make this happen, and will also be helping facilitate questions during the program. So our speaker can focus on her presentation. So please utilize the Q&A or the chat features for questions. I get the honor of introducing tonight's speaker, Martha Rampton. Martha will tell you more about herself, but she's a historian of medieval history and gender and sexuality studies at Pacific University. And Martha, I personally want to thank you for sharing your time and talents with us today. I'm going to turn this over to you, and everybody enjoy.
Thank you, Larry. I appreciate that very much. I'm very happy to be here. This is a real thrill for me. So we will get going talking about your child's pathway and journey through gender equity. So we're here today to talk about how we can understand and support our own LGBTQ kids, as well as children in the community, making sure that LGBTQ children are safe, supported, and thriving is a responsibility for all of us, not just those of us who have gay children. Many parents aren't sure how to react when their child comes out and are often surprised that one of their own kids is gay. This is true even for parents who have close LGBTQ acquaintances or family members. The child is often scared, upset, and emotionally vulnerable. Parents are often angry, distraught, and overwhelmed. There will probably be missteps on both sides as the child and the parents navigate this new territory. Today, I hope to give some insights and tips that will make this important moment in the lives of all involved smoother. I'm just going to read this slide. It's probably the most important slide here. The single most important factor in a queer child's life by far is family support. And Caitlin Ryan says, this moment of coming out to parents is a crossroads in the life of an LGBTQ person. And the parent's response is a major predictor for the child's future drug use, homelessness, and suicide attempts. I will be referring to parents throughout the presentation, and it should be understood that I am also referring to a parent, guardians, or a guardian. Often children feel more comfortable coming out or confiding to members of their family other than their parents, or at least initially that's the case. This is a good thing. The more love and support from family, the better. Hopefully, parents will not feel affronted if they are not the first or the major confidant in the family. The kids will get around to parents if parents honor the children's processes and comfort levels. What do we mean by gender equity? Important for you to understand that the terminology changes, and sometimes quickly, but much of the nomenclature around gender has become standardized. It's nice to have some of the terminology under your belt so that you can understand and communicate with youth who sometimes seem to have a language of their own. We can speak about 3 interrelated aspects of a person's identity. Put simply, and understand that there is absolutely nothing about this topic that is really simple or completely agreed upon or static. But sex is assigned at birth based on visible characteristics. The general assumption is that a person is either male or female based on their genitals. Gender is a social construction, meaning that gender characteristics are formed by a given society over centuries, and they can change. It's easy to explain this in regard to clothing. I'm a medieval historian, and so this particularly spoke to me. Throughout the Middle Ages, to be a woman meant to dress like a woman. In early medieval law codes, there were 3 reasons a man could get a divorce from his wife, and one of them is if the woman cross-dressed. In the case of Joan of Arc, of course, you'll remember Joan of Arc, the major and the first charge that was brought against her isn't treason, it wasn't witchcraft, it was wearing men's clothing. And so today, of course, women can dress in just about anything without their gender being questioned. So gender really is culturally specific. Sexuality refers to a person's preference as to sexual romantic partners. It might be helpful to think of gender as your relationship to yourself, how you see yourself. And sexual romantic orientation is your relationship to others. There are 2 identities that are independent of each other. For example, a person might be assigned male at birth and transition to female. In other words, he's transgender. And then that person might be a lesbian, born a male, transition to female, but is a lesbian, and so is socially and sexually and romantically attracted to women. Yes, and so it's a system. The sex is assigned at birth, then gender and orientation are assumed or dictated to align with that sex. Any deviation from this normative ideology is basically what brings someone into the LGBTQ community. Now some terminology, and you really have very little here. It can go on. And I think it's important to realize that we're not going to learn all about it. It changes quickly, and it's not necessary to understand all of the terminology, but I'm going to give you a little bit just to set you up with some of the more common terms. So first of all, LGBTQT. And so most of us understand that gay, lesbian, bisexual, trans is LGBTQ, or the LGBT, and Q is a term or a letter that's been added relatively recently. It used to just be LGBT. And queer is a term for a sort of an umbrella term for all of these other words. It used to be derogatory, but it has been reclaimed. It's, like I say, it's an umbrella term for LGBT, but it particularly applies to gender and sexual orientation that are outside the LGBT. It is only used as an adjective, not a noun. So you might say, I'm taking a class on queer theory, but you don't say, my brother is a queer. So that's the sort of thing that was very, pejorative at an early period. So now the word used as an adjective is not in any way offensive, at least to people who sort of understand the nomenclature. However, if the word makes you uncomfortable, don't use it. It's not necessary. For those of us who are older, I think we sometimes sort of, recoil because we've tried very hard not to use insulting language. Let's look at cisgender. This means that a person's sex assigned at birth matches their gender. So assigned woman at birth and thinks of herself as a woman. It's the opposite of transgender, where a person's sex assigned at birth does not match their gender. So a person assigned female at birth, but feels that the gender is actually male. Transitioning then means that a person is making a transition from cisgender to transgender. It's not specifically about physical changes, but it's largely used that way. Non-binary, there's the next 2 categories are really overlapping. So non-binary, gender non-conforming, and gender queer kind of mean the same thing. Non-binary is an umbrella term for gender identities that are not solely male or female. And then gender non-conforming or gender queer, like I say, very similar, is behavior or gender expression by an individual that does not match masculine or feminine norms. Ally, it's an important term, and it's actually part of the plus, LGBTQ plus, and it means just what it sounds like. It's an ally, somebody who's not LGBTQ, but is very interested in promoting or supporting people who are. Now, faggot's an interesting word. It's very derogatory. So whereas, queer no longer is, if used as an adjective, faggot is very derogatory. However, as is the case in many groups, sometimes faggot is used within the queer community itself to kind of take the sting out of it, the way sometimes groups of women will call each other bitch in a way that males would never, feel comfortable doing. So sometimes within communities, they'll use this derogatory language, but that choice isn't really open to people outside of the community. Recently, though, in the 21st century, there's a youth culture around right around the turn of the century, where the meaning of fag or faggot was extended as a broader reaching insult, more related to masculinity and boys policing other boys' behavior. There's a great book. I'm going to give you the name of it. It's not in the resources at the end, but it's called Dude, You're a Fag. And it's by C.J. Pascoe. I think it's one of the most important books for parents with boys to read. I can't get into it much now, but it's a way of for boys who are not gay, neither the person using the term and the person to whom the term is used, they're not gay, but calling someone gay if they're too attached to their mother, if they're going to give flowers to their girlfriend or something, if you say, dude, you're a fag, it really polices boys' behavior so that they're not emotional, they're not overly sensitive, etc. Again, that's sort of a different topic. There is interesting. I'm going to talk more about it as we go on. This is a hard one. So it's a pronoun that's used, and it's, as a professional writer, it's very hard for me to use because it's now acceptable. In fact, it's even preferable to use they or their as a pronoun for a single person rather than using he, her. And so, for instance, you can say, we used to say, everybody take out his pencil. But then we stopped saying that because, that seemed pretty gender specific. And so then we used to say, everybody take out his/her pencil. But that doesn't quite cut it anymore because everybody isn't a him or a her. Some people are, they're gender queer is a term we use. So that leaves some people out who are non-binary. So now we say, everyone take out their pencil. And like I say, there's nobody for whom that is harder than for me. But I noticed that there is being used that way, for instance, in media, etc. So I think that's probably here to stay. Let's talk about gender pronouns. It's fun, let's dive into this. This is actually pretty important. This isn't fringe at all. This is very important, and you've gotten to the point where on forms, tax forms, etc., you're able to indicate a gender other than male and female. So they, them, and I have to say it's hard to get used to. Calling a single person they, them. It really is hard. But I want to read you something that a Pacific University student wrote a few years ago, because I think it captures more than anything what it does to an individual who identifies as they, them. In other words, they're non-binary. They don't identify with either one of the traditional genders. So she says, when you choose to misgender someone, you're causing them great emotional distress. You can imagine how frustrating it would be if someone decided they did not like your name, and so they called you by a name they chose instead. It's the same with misgendering. It's not only frustrating, but invalidating. It's like you're telling that person, I understand what you want, but I just don't care. My convenience is more important than your identity. Often when just existing in a public space, people are casually misgendered. So when you are informed of someone's pronouns and you choose to ignore them, you're adding to the list of microaggressions they are forced to experience throughout their day. So it's not just ideological, it's very personal and can be very painful. So how do you know how to use the right pronoun? With anyone, your children obviously as well. And I tell you, it's not easy and it's not cut and dried. But as I'm going to say later, the most important thing is that you try. So first of all, ask. This works in some settings, like in a small group or a meeting. If you meet someone in the grocery store, you're not going to probably ask what their pronouns are. But if you're at a meeting around a boardroom or something, be sure to ask everybody in the group their pronouns, not just those people who appear to be non-binary. Sometimes asking pronouns can be tricky, though, because it outs people who may not want to be out. The next one is a little easier, and that is listen. Often people will indicate their pronouns in ways that aren't necessarily just telling you flat out. So listening is always good. Don't assume a person is one sex gender or another sex gender. That just can't be done. A person's pronouns based on their appearance doesn't work. Just keeping this in mind is important. It gets automatic after a while that you look at a person and you just don't make those assumptions about their sex or their gender. Articulate your own pronouns. Now, this has to be done in certain places, like the tagline on your email is a possibility, or other kinds of communication, and it's done very frequently now. So I don't think most people find this odd. Again, you would only do this in a particular setting. Sometimes when you're too eager to say my pronouns or she, her, it's a signal that the person you're talking to is clearly not cisgender. So don't let it be a code word. Like you see someone, you think, that person's not clearly male or female, so I'm going to tell my pronouns, and so I can be sure what theirs are. So again, these all it's sort of walking a tightrope on some of these issues, but it's important to try. And so, like I'm saying, the most important is do your best. There's no need to apologize profusely if you slip up. It's okay. I don't know any LGBTQ people who have been offended when someone's trying to use the proper pronouns and slips up. And with my students, as Larry indicated, I ran a Center for Gender Equity at Pacific University. I said, listen, here's what I want to do if I slip. Does this work for you? And so what I did is I would go along, and if I use, say, her pronoun where it should have been they, I said, just tell me. And so I would say, okay, I want her, they'd say they to come forward. I didn't even skip a beat. And so that was comfortable for the students, that was comfortable for me. And so hopefully everybody can find a comfort level for themselves. It's hard, you may not get it right away, but I think it's important to try. Can you tell? Well, mostly the answer is no. However, there is a little bit I want to say about that. There are no signs you should be looking for in young children, except for in terms of transgender. And I'm going to talk about that in just a minute. It's a larger topic. I strongly suggest you read This Is How It Always Is by Lori Franklin. It's on the list in the resources. Frankly, that is the most important thing I have read in a long time to help me understand transgender. It's about a woman who has a transgender male and boy, and it's a true story. So it's beautifully written, and it really brings to life how a person grows through this, and it's a person who's not particularly clued in, to all the gender sorts of things that we're talking about right now. So I highly recommend that. But basically, it's not possible to tell who is queer based on external or personal characteristics, like how one walks, the voice, the clothing, the jewelry, the occupation. And for me now, when I watch sitcoms or something that were done 20 years ago, and every time there's a gay male has a lisp and is a hairdresser, that sort of thing, I'm really glad we're through with that. I'm really glad we're through with that. And we realize that all kinds of different people are, gay, gender nonconforming, etc. There aren't any signs. But in terms of trans, there are signs, and it's important to know that to help the student. Gender dysmorphia. This is important, I think, and you run into this quite a bit. It's more common than I think people think. I mean, it's poorly understood, and it doesn't just refer to gender, but people who are trans, especially children who are trans, experience this a lot. So let's read this. How do you feel? The student was asked. I feel itchy. My skin doesn't feel right on me. Parts of my body don't feel right. Sometimes gender dysphoria can cause panic attacks. When I have a panic attack, I'll just feel really physically drained and nauseous. I also have dysmorphia, which is a psychological disorder in which you are intensely uncomfortable with the way that you look, which is also a part of my dysphoria. I'll be looking in the mirror and just feel really, really uncomfortable with the way my face is shaped and how feminine I look. I'll feel really uncomfortable with my body because of my dysphoria. And then I'll actively hate my body because of my dysmorphia. Then they go hand in hand with each other. And dysmorphia is when you look in the mirror and you see aspects of yourself that probably aren't really there. Like often people will look in the mirror, somebody who's really concerned about weight, and even if they've lost 50 pounds, they still see that larger person. And so often with kids who are trans, they'll look in the mirror and they'll see a side of themselves they didn't want to see. And that's dysmorphia and dysphoria is just a general depression, dissatisfaction with life. So some mythbusters. Young children are not yet able to understand gender. That's not right. They may be not able to articulate the way they do, but they certainly understand gender. If your child is, and also transgender generally almost always shows up very early, like around the age of 5. Children don't always tell about it or express it, or maybe don't even understand it that young, but that's when it shows up. Keep it a secret as long as possible to protect your child, and not a good idea for the child, for yourself. Again, I refer you to the Frankel book. That's what she and her family tried to do, is keep it a secret. If your child is trans, other children will bully them. And in no way do I want to discount the issue of bullying or the problem of bullying. Certainly it happens. However, what we're finding out is that as the culture becomes more comfortable with LGBTQ, young children often learn that a classmate is trans, and it isn't that important to them. Now, there's a point at which children become sadly socialized to be homophobic, but in early ages, they won't necessarily bully your child. It's becoming more normative. But again, that's big quotation marks in terms of a myth buster. Bullying happens, but don't keep it quiet because you think it will happen. Hormone inhibitors are safe, an automatic solution. And if you don't know what this is, it's a medication that arrests puberty, so that if a person identifies as trans, that person doesn't go through puberty yet. And then that gives the child a little bit more time to, figure it out, to use it for lack of a better term. And then if the person does try to transition, the transition is much more successful. But hormone inhibitors are dangerous, and they inhibit more than just puberty. So you could look at that. Gender affirming surgery is child abuse, very personal decision between the child and the parent. So you hear a lot about that's child abuse, and I think that's something we'd have to look at more closely. Being transgender is just a fad. This is interesting to me because I would have in fact, I have, castigated my sisters sometimes when they say that. I say, no, it's not a fad. People, they're hesitant to come out, etc. But now I learned that in schools, actually, there are a lot of people, a lot of students are saying they're trans. And so, and it's not that big a percentage of the population that's really trans. So it's unlikely for all of those students to continue to feel that way. But we still just have to accept what the child says. And then, that will work itself out later. So it's not just a fad, but there's some elements of that now, because this is so relevant in the population, that we need to consider. Okay, this is speaking about puberty inhibitors. This is a woman, was born as a man, and she came out rather late in life. And so, like I said, the earlier a person has the transformation surgery, the more successful it is. I'm not saying that's necessarily an argument for doing it early, just telling you that that's the case. So asked what it was like for her when she was young. She says scary. Also, how alone I was in my non-understanding of what was going on. I didn't want to tell anyone. Somehow I was very embarrassed to show any signs of female characteristics or to like girls things publicly. I remember having to live a dual life. I have this memory. I was about 5, and I just moved to this new town. There were a bunch of kids, and I got to know, and I played with a little bit. There were girls and boys. Part of the place was a lake. I didn't want to do what it looked like guys wanted to do, and the girls didn't quite accept me. Neither one was fitting for me at that time. I remember going over to the other side of the street, sitting on the bridge overlooking the brook that fed the lake, and just wondering, what am I? Am I an alien? not a good way for a person to feel, and certainly not the way that we want our children to feel. Okay, the bad news here. Good news is coming. I put that at the bottom there. I don't want you to think that this is all going to be a tale of woes. But the bad news is that LGBTQ youth are at an increased risk for various physical and mental illnesses, including depression, anxiety, drug and alcohol abuse, STDs, health risks, attending homelessness, and suicide. And there are a lot of statistics about suicide, and I actually put them on a slide at the end of this presentation. And I think you're going to have access to this presentation because I don't want to, dwell on the suicide. I mean, it's there. I think we need to understand the dangers, but there are ways to avoid this, suicide. And that's why we're here. And that's what we're going to talk about next. Okay, some don'ts. There's lots of do's, but let's talk first about the don'ts. First of all, don't believe everything. Wait a minute, I've lost my place. Don't believe everything you read online or on TikTok. There's just so much bad information out there and harmful information. So go to sources that you trust. Don't assume that being queer affects other aspects of their personhood, like religion, politics, etc. Your child has likely already come out to others to test the waters. So when the child comes out to you, it's not like, okay, this is a whole new ballgame. And I made that mistake myself. My nephew came out to the family. And so I just assumed that he changed his religion, he changed his politics to align more closely with, religion or politics that's more supportive of LGBTQ. And he hadn't changed at all. And so, that's pretty insulting to reduce anybody to one aspect of themselves. The other thing is shame. Don't shame your child sort of, quote, out of it on religious or other grounds. Your child isn't going to be startled or shamed out of it. That's not going to happen. Silence can also be taken for disapproval. Again, if you shame your child, it will just silence, hurt, isolate, and scare them. It will not change their gender or their orientation. Same with ignoring your child's gender, sexuality, identity. It won't go away. Homosexuality is not a choice. Don't say. Now, some of these seem pretty obvious, but they're not to everybody. Don't say, oh no, big deal, thinking you're being really supportive. I, again, have a personal story about this. Some friends of mine in Portland had a son who's gay. They have a son who's gay, and he came out to them when he was a teenager, and being very supportive, they said, okay, well, that's no big deal. Goes away, son goes away, comes back an hour later, he says, but it is a big deal. I thought that was so interesting because the parents were doing their very best, and yet saying you're gay, that's a huge deal. So, be aware of that. That's probably not the worst mistake you can make, though. I wouldn't worry too much about that. Next one is we don't understand what did we do wrong. And of course, that would make a child feel very terrible. So that's not a good thing to say. As for we so hope for grandchildren, well, of course, we all pretty much know that couples or individuals can have children, whether they're gay or not. Furthermore, frankly, it's not a child's responsibility to deliver grandchildren to their parents. It's a fad that goes along with what I was saying earlier. Like I said, I understand from teachers and parents that many children in schools are thinking they're trans, when it's perhaps not likely so, just because of the percentage of people in the population. But sometimes, from what I understand, children will have discomfort about a lot of things. They'll be depressed, they'll be confused, maybe even confused about their own sexuality, even if they are cisgender. And because being trans is so out there now in the media, they attach that word to the way they're feeling. So that can happen. So if your child says that they're trans, go with it. The rest, sort it out later, whatever. But the worst thing to say is, no, you're not, or it's just a phase. It's a fad. How do we support our kids' gender identity? So you got the do's and the don'ts. So here are some of the do's. Tell your child you believe them and that you love them. Ask them what they want in the way of support. Be aware that one child coming out affects the other members of the family who may also need support or advice on how to help or handle. Help your child reach out to members of your extended family or others in your circle who are queer, happy, and successful, if your child's comfortable with that reaching out. Some more do's. Support LGBTQ organizations or events like Pride Parade if you can. It's very important that you're authentic. So if you try too hard, like if you're really nervous about going to a Pride Parade and you want to be there for your kid, and you try too hard, that may end up backfiring and embarrass the child. So do what you can, but stay authentic. That seems sort of contrary to some of the things I was saying earlier, but authenticity is extremely important in working through this. Help your child to search out positive media representations and well-known role models, and watch as a family. Perhaps the most important thing on this list is being nice to yourself. When kids come out of the closet, everyone in the family who knows is also in their own kind of closet. So in a sense, the family has been treated to the experience of the queer community. It's not an easy path. It may be uncomfortable for parents to navigate talking about their family with coworkers, friends, extended family, and things like mentally changing pronouns, names, and the gender or sex of their children's partners. There's a lot to juggle there. Rather than it being a hardship, it can be an empathy opportunity for parents to experience what it's like for their child to navigate the world. Having to think about safety, social consequences, and other consequences, the most important thing you can do is letting your child know that you love and accept them. What I was just reading, actually, it came from a colleague and a student of mine, former student of mine, who can't emphasize enough, she's gay, and she had a real bad experience. She had the worst kind of experience, and so in some ways it's informative talking to her. And she says the most important thing is that the kid knows you love them, you accept them. Okay, let's talk about other communities a little bit. The experience of coming out and being queer is different, more challenging in most Black, Brown, AAPI, and Islamic communities, but the same do's and don'ts apply, especially in the home. Now, I want to admit that I have slighted other communities of race, religion, ethnicities in my presentation. Every human is intersectional, having a combination of roles and characteristics, race, gender, sexuality, age, ableism, social economic status, etc. These characteristics do not exist in isolation. Some communities are more accepting of LGBTQ than others. Some children are already discriminated against because of their race, religion, etc. So being gay just adds on. If you want more information, you can find it in the resources section at the end of this PowerPoint. I'm going to go back, actually. So I want to make one concluding comment before we go to questions. In this overwhelming, horrible legislative climate, support at home is even more important than ever. Minors are seeing their futures limited in other states and threatened in national politics if they're old enough to understand or to comprehend what's going on. Gay kids are demonized by politicians and news media, and that does not escape them, even if they are not avid followers of politics. As a final note, I think we can all agree on this one thing. Kids should be able to just be kids, not to have to fight to exist. Okay, here's some resources, and I'm very eager to talk to you and hear your questions. So again, I know you're going to get a copy of this if you want it. So here's a lot of resources. They run the spectrum of all the things I've been talking about. All right, I'm going to stop sharing now, and we can have time for questions.
Feel free to put questions in the chat, or you can unmute yourself and speak out if you wish. We'd be happy to have you ask your questions at this point. So what could parents or guardians do if they have a child that they suspect may be going in the direction of being quote unquote queer or trans? And what could they do to in terms of their interaction, because the child hasn't said anything to them?
Oh, that's really a good question. And of course, yeah, trans is fairly specific and queer is broader. So if a child was, gay or lesbian, that would be a different sort of thing, I think, than if the child were trans. I don't have anything brilliant to say about that, except listen, watch, be available. I think it's important not to push your children. I think another possibility is putting, for a change, turning media to our advantage. In other words, expose the child perhaps to media where there's trans figures or where there's information about being trans. So it's delicate. You don't want to push them. You don't want to scare them. So listen, I guess the best thing is for you to be really informed. So if you're really informed about transgender and children, transition, et cetera, then I think you can be more helpful. So that's what I would say. I think the more the children trust you and know that you're a safe space, the more they'll come out. But another thing is often kids, despite what I said, is children really understand gender and they know if they're trans. They don't know. As in other words, sometimes they're just confused about their own behaviors and they don't fit in and they want to wear dresses and things like that. So those kinds of comments should be very, very welcome, because that really helps you without labeling the child or making it difficult. Easy enough for a kid to say, I want to wear dresses, for a boy to say, I want to wear dresses. Harder for a boy to say, I think I'm really a girl.
I think also it's something that it depends on the child's age also. Do you want to address that in terms of differences of, a 4 or 5-year-old versus say a 15-year-old?
I wouldn't say there's much difference in the approach. I would say the difference is in the particular materials or the particular questions. So I think they're both the same. Listen, create an opening environment, and the idea of helping the child to normalize it or helping the child to understand it is really important. So if there's media, or I'm trying to think even some other people that they know who are properly or trans, that helps. But again, I'm going to go back to the same word: listen, be open. Can I just add something, Katie? If I had a trans kid who's 15, I'm just saying, I guess that's what I just said. I wouldn't do anything much different. I don't think it's any less confusing or easier for a 15-year-old than it is for a young child.
Thank you. Not sure if I don't see any questions in the chat. I think that your approach has been very interesting. And Larry has lost his Wi-Fi. He'll be coming back in probably. Jessica, do you have any questions that you might want to ask? You're on mute.
Hi. Yeah, no, definitely. When for me, my experiences, with after school care and being in a position where, let's say we are the teacher or we're the non-parent, right? Let's just say that the person that's of public to that youth or that child, but maybe not the parent. What are some suggestions that you feel that as an adult role can help in these, be able to navigate, or even help parents? Like, how do we help initiate that conversation when we see things in the classroom or in the space that we're in, and we're recognizing this, but maybe we need to have that conversation with the parent? Like, how does that dialogue start?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, one of the things I think we do not want to do is pathologize any of this. And that happens a lot, informally, where we talk about this as a problem. I mean, I'm not suggesting, Jessica, that your question is doing that in any sense, but I think sometimes our language can lead us to a direction that is implied. So, and I'm just thinking this through, but if a child has a problem, I don't know, paying attention, for instance, or one of the other many behaviors that we're sort of used to, I guess you would think, how do I approach that? How would I talk to the parent about that? And maybe kind of apply the same rules. Yeah, I don't think it should be whispered about. And, we're talking about a lot of things, but when it comes to this, I'm going to whisper, etc. So I think be comfortable with it. But of course, you want to be careful not to out the child, right? Not to out the child. So I think questions are more important than answers. If a parent is asking you questions, obviously giving that parent resources is important. But if there's too much intervention by someone really outside of the family, sometimes I think that can thwart what's happening inside the family. Treating it as it's a problem at school. My mom went to school and found out from my teacher that I'm probably gay, that sort of thing. So the more it's kind of in the family initially, I think the better. I guess what the teacher can say to the parent is, I don't know, I was going to say something and then I realized it was contradictory to what I said about
Like,
outing.
this happened to me before. Like, you get close with some of those that you were, have class with, and they become comfortable and really more of like a mentor. So they get comfortable enough to share these things with you. And this happened to me, earlier. And so they're like, I think I'm gay, but I don't know how to talk to my parents. So like, what do I do? You know what I mean? Like, how outside of personally how I would share, but like, it's like they're having a hard time talking to their parents, but they feel comfortable sharing that with me. I don't want to share that for them, but how do I start some kind of dialogue to be like, what would you suggest I share the child? Like, what would the advice be for the child that told me that?
Well, yeah, I mean, I want to answer that, but first of all, you would never, I don't think, out the child to the parents, have that information and tell the parents, I guess, unless they're in danger or something like that. I think you just talk to the child about the kinds of things that we've talked about. Let the child talk, listen to the child, that sort of thing. It's very, very frightening to come out. I have a student, she's in college, she worked for the Center for Gender Equity, and she's gay. And well, this is more than one student, several of them, they work for Center for Gender Equity, and they absolutely did not want their parents to know they were working for the Center for Gender Equity. And that's an organization that deals with gender of all kinds, not just LGBTQ. So it's a very, very frightening thing for the child. And I think the obligation is to the child, not to the parent. If people have questions, sometimes it's really helpful if they want to share their own experiences. Sometimes for parents or others, that's the strongest thing to do.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I'm really happy to entertain any questions and would encourage them, and not to be afraid that maybe you would sort of use the wrong terminology or something like that. Sometimes people are a little bit hesitant because they're afraid of that. And that's exactly what we don't want.
Yeah. I think, people are really, really sensitive to these topics. And a lot of times people are afraid to step in, a mud puddle and,
Right.
that it might create more problems. And so silence is oftentimes what happens. And so that makes it pretty difficult.
There's some other issues that come up that I didn't bring up, but they're real. And that is, the religious issues. I mean, a lot of parents, and many perhaps that we're talking to, they just, have strong beliefs against homosexuality in any form. And that's difficult. And so sometimes a presentation like this doesn't address that. And I think nor should it particularly, but all I can say is you're not alone. On the resource page, there are a couple of resources for religious organizations, not specific religions, but religion in general. And I think that's, you know, well, I'll just tell you a story, unless you want me to quit. But I have my brother, tell me when I should quit, all right? This kind of thing. My brother is LDS, right? Mormon, real devout. In fact, he was a bishop of the church. I was brought up Mormon too. And so it's a conservative religion. I think is dynamic, wonderful, but very conservative religion. And so he has 6 kids. 4 of them are gay, LGBTQ. And the reason I'm sort of laughing is of all of the people in my family, I have 5 brothers and sisters, that is the one who's least equipped, you know, to handle this kind of thing. And again, I don't want to talk about it like it's a disease that has to be handled, but he and his wife have done a brilliant job, and it's taken a while of working through what this means to the family, what this means to them in terms of their religion. I think all of the children who have come out, I think all of them have left the religion, and I don't think it's just because of their gender and sexual orientation, but I don't know why. Oh yeah, I know where I was going with that. And so my sister-in-law found a group, a support group for parents of LGBT kids, specifically with the Mormon Church. And that helped her more than a general organization would, because it's very specific to her beliefs and her norms. And so those kinds of groups are available for all the different denominations that you could think of. And again, there is a reference there in the references for these, you know, various and sundry religious groups. So that could help. Anyone want to make a comment about that, about how as much as you want to support your child, you might just think that child is doing something that is wrong or sinful? And before I go, I mean, that sounds really mean, but you know, if that's the way parents feel, if that's where they are, that's where they are.
I think that's probably about it. I want to thank Martha very much. I want to thank Jessica. I want to thank Talia for being an excellent translator for us this evening. And I hope that you all have a very good evening. And thank you so very much.
Thank you, Katie. Take care.